All right, so now we're on to the objection section for the teleological or design argument. So we left off in the last video noting that premise 2 of the teleological argument claims that the universe as a whole is a teleological system. But remember what we said earlier, we don't have proof of this. That's why we have to argue by analogy in the first place. We don't get to experience the whole universe. We get to experience a very small part of it. So the first thing we should be doing is changing premise 2 of the argument, not to say the universe resembles a machine, but many natural parts of the universe resemble a machine. And that'll change our conclusion too. Now our conclusion will say probably many parts of the universe were produced by intelligent design. Now that's still important, right? That would still require an intelligent designer to design parts of the universe. And it could be that the whole thing, the whole universe requires intelligent design, but we just can't make a claim about that because our evidence is too little. Okay, so that's the first thing we should notice. We can only make a claim about some parts of the universe, so we can only say some parts require intelligent design. But that doesn't destroy the argument. That still just qualifies it in an important way to accord with the evidence we have. Okay, so one issue that many people have brought up is that there are certain objects, right? So science, biology, chemistry, so on and so forth, physics, have given us very strong explanations for how our planet could have formed, and the nature we see on our planet could just be the result of nature and random sort of chance. But they think there are, just in the same way as we don't have evidence of the whole universe being produced by intelligent design, people will say there are parts of our natural universe that we experience that have to be produced by intelligent design. So one really common example is the human eye. Right? So they've argued that no amount of time, right, no amount of small step-by-step process could produce something as complex as the human eye. Right? How could you start with a being that has no sight and then somehow develop slowly over time into having this really complicated human organ with really great qualities of sight, right? That adjusts to lighting, that can see at different distances, can bring in all of these different informational bits about color, right? We have a really complex eye organ. And so the claim is, even if we can't say the Earth needs intelligent design to exist, we'll say something about humans, right? Our eyes or other pieces of us, those are so complex that they could never happen by accident. In the same way we would never expect a phone to just fall together, right? All the parts are just floating in the air and then they collide and now we have a cell phone, right? They say, obviously that can't happen, so we shouldn't expect the same thing with the human eye either. It's so complex that no amount of parts just floating around coming together could produce the human eye. Now, if this is your argument in support of the teleological argument, realize you have a competitor, right? A very important competitor, the theory of evolution. Right? So, if your support for the teleological argument is going to rely on things like the human eye, then you have to show that evolution or any other competing explanation can't provide an answer, can't create the human eye. Right? Unfortunately for the teleological argument, or these special proponents of the teleological argument, there is, and has been for a long time, a very detailed description about how the eye can develop over time. If you just do a quick search on YouTube, there are PBS specials, National Geographic specials, that show how a being with just sort of a light-sensitive patch, with no eyes, just a light-sensitive patch on its skin, so it could detect whether it's light or dark, over time, so that patch would start to cave in a little bit, so it could have more focused information, and so on and so forth, and it would develop over time. And you can go, and I don't know the science behind the whole thing, right? I don't know every evolutionary step. But you can go watch these very detailed explanations that show how you can start with just a simple patch of skin that's light sensitive on a being and develop into the full complex human eye. So, once again, this doesn't destroy the argument, but it does say that if your main support for thinking there are parts of the universe that require intelligent design, like the human eye or so on and so forth, you have to get rid of the competing explanations. So you might appeal to something else, maybe that evolution doesn't also attempt to explain, but then you have to make sure there are no other competing explanations there. Right? Okay, good. So now we can get into the big. So those are sort of just minor things, right? Make sure you qualify the second premise and conclusion so that it accords with your evidence, and then make sure that there are no competing explanations, as of right now, for many of the claims that teleological argument proponents make about the natural parts of the universe requiring intelligent design. There are competing explanations that they haven't dismantled yet. So that's something they have to do for the argument to work. Now for the sort of bigger criticism, and this comes from part of the, so you see the picture above with Neil deGrasse Tyson in it, excuse me, with his comment there, he's just saying, look, there are so many parts of the universe that seem very poorly designed, right? So he talks about the appendix, doesn't play much of a role, and it's actually pretty good at killing people. That seems like a design flaw. The fact that if the Earth was designed for humans to live on it, well, it seems like there was a design flaw there, because this Earth is prone to so many sort of natural phenomenon, or we call them natural disasters, but natural phenomena that kill humans, right? So that seems like a design flaw. I mean, my eyes are flawed in their design. They can't see as well as many others. Wisdom teeth are another great example, right? Most of us will never use our wisdom teeth. Most have to have them pulled out because they lead to health problems down the road as they sort of rot away inside your gums. Right? So there are all sorts of things we can see that are flawed. But Tyson's objection only goes so far, right? Because he's saying, just look, with all the evidence you have to say there has been intelligent design, we have evidence too to say that there are flaws in the design. Right? And so, what is this pointing out? Well, I think Tyson is trying to point out the same thing that David Hume said a couple hundred years ago. Right? And this big objection is really just that even if the intelligent design argument works, right? So even if the argument we've given, there's no objections that succeed, that's a big if, but if there are no objections that succeed, the argument doesn't even get us close to the theistic conception of God, or the Christian conception of God, or the Western conception of God. Right? That God we talked about last week is omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, self-existent, eternal, creator of the universe, so on and so forth. Right? What does the conclusion of this argument say? That God exists? No. The conclusion of this argument says that there is an intelligent designer. So that intelligent designer could lack all of those other qualities, right? He doesn't have to be all-powerful. He just has to be powerful enough to create the universe. He doesn't have to be that smart either. It could be that this God has made dozens of universes before he stumbled upon ours, and all of those past attempts at creating a universe were failures, right? He tried to create it and it exploded. Or he tried to create it, it collapsed. So on and so forth, right? So this doesn't require an all-powerful designer or an all-knowing designer. It definitely doesn't require an all-good designer, right? So this designer could have nothing but selfish intentions, right? So he didn't create the universe to bring value, right? He created the universe because he needed some entertainment for himself. Or maybe he's created universes in the past where he just created like a sandbox for himself and then he let things grow and then he started just smashing them, right? There's all sorts of possibilities. All we know is that this thing is a designer. In addition, it couldn't be, and this is important, we think God is eternal. He's outside the laws of space and time. Uh, but with just a designer, we don't know that to be the case either. Maybe the intelligent designer designed the universe, set it into motion, and then died. Right? And now he's not here anymore. And that's why, if you think there are flaws in the universe, he isn't here to sort of tinker and fix them. He died a long time ago. Right? So the biggest thing is just we don't get the Christian Western theistic conception of God from this argument. We just get an intelligent designer. That might lack a number of other important qualities. Now, that's not to say that God doesn't exist, right? That's not what the argument is. It's just that we've only established that there's something, if this argument works, we've only established that there's something that's an intelligent designer. Now we're going to need a bunch of other arguments to show that it has to be all powerful, all knowing, all good, eternal, and so on. So we might be able to sort of piece together the Christian God from a number of different arguments. The main thing to know, though, is just this argument alone can't give us the Christian God. It can only give us an intelligent designer. And so that's why I said I think that's what Tyson's getting at, because he's saying, look at all these design flaws. Right? That means that God failed to produce a perfect universe. That wouldn't make sense, right? If God has all the qualities we talked about, he's the big, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, eternal God. He's the perfect God, right? Then he would also create a universe without flaws. Right? Otherwise, we'd say God wasn't perfect because he made a flawed creation. Right? So I think Tyson's trying to point out that the big problem here is that even if the intelligent design people are right, it doesn't get us God. It just gets us something like a designer. Okay, good. And so Hume also has one other objection to discuss, but we've pretty much already gone over it in the beginning. Right? So he just says the universe is so vast and our experience of it is so small that it's rationally irresponsible for us to claim that the universe resembles a machine. And so we've already said this, but I wanted to make it clear that Hume had said this a couple hundred years ago. Right? So Hume was the main sort of critic of the teleological argument who shows us why we need to qualify premise 2 and the conclusion in order to accord with our evidence. Okay, so quick summary. Hume gave us this rational discussion about why we need to qualify premise 2 and 3 to accord with our evidence. Even after we do that, we need to make sure there are no competing explanations. So far, I mean, for people who use the I, there's the competing explanation of evolution. For people who use the initial conditions of the universe, right? So there's this argument that things at the beginning of the universe had to be so fine-tuned in order for the universe to not just collapse back in on itself. And it's super unlikely that we get like all of those laws to fall in the right place. Right? So God needed to be there to fine-tune those things in order to produce this really unlikely universe. But there's a competing explanation for that too, right? And we won't spend much time on this, but it's just the multiple universe theory, right? Where there's been multiple universes, and so the claim would just be, well, no, we got this universe by, I mean, a very small chance, but if we produce an infinite number of universes, we're bound to stumble upon one that works eventually. Right? So there's a competing explanation there. So you have to rule out your competing explanations and then realize, even if you've gotten rid of the competing explanations and defended your argument properly, it doesn't get you the Christian God, just gets you a designer. All right, so hopefully you see the merits and downfalls of the teleological argument at this point, and we'll move on to the cosmological argument. Thank you.